Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry. Ready for some thought-provoking cerebral whipping and the destruction of ridiculous medical dogma? Want to shift those stale, moldy old paradigms? Well then, don that thinking cap of yours. Get down in the cave and join our host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, for this week's episode. Let's start spelunking.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry. This week's episode is a continuation of my discussion that I started last week with Dr. Codi Peterson. If you've not listened to last week's episode, I highly encourage you to click the back button right now and listen to the first part of this discussion. Trust me, it really is great. Dr. Peterson is a doctor of pharmacy and currently serves as a professor at the University of California, Irvine. His work focuses on understanding the complex interactions between cannabinoids and the human endocannabinoid system. As you probably learned from last week's episode, he has a great way to explain the physiology of the human endocannabinoid system and continues that discussion on this week's episode. Dr. Peterson's expertise extends beyond the laboratory. He's also committed to education and advocacy, regularly speaking at conferences and contributing to peer-reviewed journals. His goal is to bridge the gap between scientific research and practical applications of cannabis in healthcare and just general human optimization. He's simply a great educator, and I know you will enjoy this continuation of my conversation with Dr. Codi Peterson.
Yeah, well, I got to first talk about these other cannabinoids. I guess I should have been on this slide already. There is a ton of research on cannabinoids. We at THC, the National Academy of the Sciences says there is clear benefit of THC for certain pain disorders and cancer. Like, no doubt about it, medical establishment from the National Academy of Sciences is an extremely reputable organization. There's a ton of information. States have 20 indications. There's, again, 38 states that have approved it. And there's not just THC. There's the CBD we talked about. There's the CBN we mentioned. And there's even molecules that we didn't get into, CBGV, CBDV, CBC. And so I want people to take away is there's a lot to understand, and it's not just a THC and CBD game. And the therapeutic benefits, all of these have some degree of preclinical study that assesses and has shown that they're antioxidants and neuroprotective and relieve pain and anti-inflammatory and muscle relaxants. This is all based on mostly animal studies, but some human studies as well. These are therapeutic, and it's amazing. Why are they therapeutic? Because we all have an endocannabinoid system. Now, break the word down. Endocannabinoid. We talked about cannabinoid. These are the class of molecules found in cannabis. But then we put the word endo on it. Endo stands means from inside. Once again, going back to Greek. So these are the cannabinoids, the class of molecules from cannabis from inside of us. So we all take the fats, all of us, every human on earth, but also every lizard, every bird, everything, every vertebrate has an endocannabinoid system that's maintaining homeostasis. This system is ubiquitous in animals, and it falls into its functions fall into relax, eat, sleep, forget, and protect. Now,
Codi, just real quick,
yeah,
just define homeostasis for some of the audience, because all of them are not physicians, and
Sure.
It's a very important concept.
It's an extremely important concept. You have to think about life almost at the cellular level to truly appreciate homeostasis, and you can build it up from there. But I'll give you an example. My temperature is 98.6 degrees right now, right? And I'm supposed to be sitting right there. Now, if I go outside where it's 60 degrees, and my body is going to start to naturally decrease in temperature. But the human body only really functions between something like 96 and 104. And other than that, you're dying.
Right.
So the body has to do work in order to maintain that body temperature. Part of the system that tells the body to do that work, to burn fuel differently, to create heat, is the endocannabinoid system. It is the body's adjustment to the dynamic environment that it's in. It's the system that says, okay, we wake up in the morning, we release these molecules for energy, and then towards the night, we have a cycle that goes back down. The and the homeostasis is an organism or a cell responding to its environment to maintain that equilibrium necessary for life.
Right.
You help me out. What else?
Yeah,
can
no,
tell
no,
people
I
about
think
homeostasis?
it's just homeostasis is just a regulatory mechanism so that we stay in balance, for lack of a better way to put it. And if the car starts to run too fast, the governor kicks in and slows it down because it knows it can't handle that level of speed for a very long period of time. Whereas if the body is kind of slowing down too much, there's things that kick in like cortisol that will increase the metabolism and get things going. So that's how I would think of homeostasis.
Yeah, and to jump off of cortisol, that is actually intertwined tightly with the endocannabinoid system. In fact, the body, when it releases cortisol, it releases a feedback molecule in that process of endocannabinoids that tells the body to release less cortisol. So the endocannabinoid system throughout your circadian rhythm, where your cortisol spikes towards the morning and midday and goes down,
Right.
it is the endocannabinoid system that trails right behind the cortisol to turn it off naturally every day. So it's inherently tuned in. So if you think about these 4 or 5 functions on the screen, and then just help think about THC, because THC helped us discover this system, okay?
Right.
THC is actually sort of the namesake of the system, right? The endocannabinoid system, and THC was that cannabinoid. Relax. Does that sound kind of like something THC might be used for from here and then? Yeah, it can. Yeah,
right.
people are trying. If you go too high, it's going to be the opposite, though. You're not going to relax. You're going to have anxiety and have paranoia, right? So it's both. Eat. You might associate that with cannabis here and there. THC has a profound effect on appetite, and patients who take large doses of CBD seem to eat less. Sleep. Definitely, patients are taking THC, CBD, and CBN for sleep. Millions across the U.S. every day. Forget, you got. Wait, what was I talking about?
Right.
There's all sorts of THC effects. And protect. We know that the endocannabinoid system, specifically the CB2 receptor, it's mostly CB1 and CB2. CB1 is in the brain. It's the most abundant receptor in your entire brain. And CB2 is in the immune system. And in the immune system, the CB2 receptors are extremely important to the your immune function and your inflammatory response. So a couple things about your endocannabinoid system in this pretty image put together by Cayman Chemical. ECS in life on Earth. ECS is shared by all vertebrates on the planet. The birds, the fish, your dog, the so many. It's even shared by invertebrates. So leeches have an endocannabinoid system. I just posted about certain nematodes. There are hydra, 500 million year old hydra that have an endocannabinoid system in the ocean, like coral-like structures. So this is an ancient system shared on Earth, and it fine-tunes countless different functions. So let's jump over to the graphic and look at the CB1 receptors in the brain. I just think this is one of the coolest systems. The endocannabinoid system, it's not just vertebrates, it's not just invertebrates, it's ubiquitous around the planet. And interestingly, it's in every organ system. Unlike, let's call it the nervous system, where it's everywhere. The endocannabinoid system, CB1 receptors, you can see up here, are the most abundant protein receptors in the brain. There is nothing more. Serotonin, dopamine, none of them. This is CB1 receptors, the most abundant. Now, it's right next to a lot of those receptors, and it plays with dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine, but it's the most abundant one. Now, if you go to the immune system, the CB2 receptors, I don't see much. Here we go. Immune system, CB2 is extremely abundant there, and that's why we think that THC can have an effect on the immune system.
What about in the peripheral nerve? A lot of CB2 receptors?
In the peripheral nervous system, there is plenty of CB1 and CB2 receptors. CB2 is still mostly immune system, but there are glial cells and all sorts of cells throughout the immune system, microglial, that are integrated right into the nervous system that are CB2. CB2 is definitely important, but it's mostly doing an anti-inflammatory role, but not exclusively. In the liver, it's balancing out the CB1 and CB2 receptors. So Historically, there was a bit of a misnomer. If you would have looked back at graphics 10 years ago, it would have said that the CB1 receptors in the central nervous system and the CB2 receptors in the peripheral. And that's really kind of been shown to be not true. And here's actually something kind of fun about that. They looked at animals after brain injury. They looked at rodents after they would poke or prod or injure their brain. And they watched the endocannabinoid system. And while the endocannabinoid system normally doesn't have, while the brain normally doesn't have very many CB2 receptors, this immune receptor part of the ECS,
Right.
when it's injured, it ramps up a bunch of these receptors and starts producing a lot of them to try to respond to this injury and inflammatory system.
So you're saying that then it's myth that CB1 are only in the CNS, spine and brain. They're also peripheral as well as
everywhere.
As well as CB2 actually is
in
available
both as well.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, that's a good point for people to get, because if they are in a state that they're going to a dispensary, a lot of times there's confusion about that.
Mm-hmm. And it's complicated because not every cell, just teasing apart the effects that are mediated in the body directly versus indirectly. If this is the most abundant receptor in the brain and the brain drives the rest of the body, it's hard to tease apart what the drug might be doing at the organ versus at the brain. Do you follow me? So I'll give you an example with tachycardia. With THC ingestion, tachycardia is almost guaranteed. And unless your dose is extremely low, THC causes tachycardia. How and why? It interacts with CB1 receptors on the heart.
Okay.
And it also interacts with the sympathetic nervous system, and your heart has nerves. And,
right.
So there's this combination. It's not that easy to say which one, but definitely tachycardia induced by activation of CB1 receptors in the heart. It's also why that they think that THC may be associated with some arrhythmic events and other problems, large doses or chronic exposure. Small intestines, there's a lot of patients that are dealing with either Crohn's disease or irritable bowel syndrome or a number of other issues that find cannabis extremely helpful. Flip side, though, there are patients who are chronically consuming cannabis and developing something known as cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, where their GI tract is out of balance. So complicated, but these functions of the ECS, they're everywhere. They're in the bone, they're in the brain, they're in your reproductive system, both male and female. Even sperm have cannabinoid receptors on them.
Wow.
Yeah. The implantation of the egg into the uterus, dictated and mediated through the endocannabinoid system. Yeah. So it's a brilliant system. I don't have all the pictures, but I promise there's opportunities to hear me give even more in-depth talks here.
So
yeah, let's go back.
Well, this ubiquitous system,
I love that word. Yep.
is relatively newly discovered in human physiology. What, 45, 50 years ago? Or it's not that well known.
No. It's so in 1988 to 1996, the majority of the discoveries that on this graphic, not all the discoveries, but everything, the receptors and the endocannabinoids were in that time frame. And what's that? 30 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, for something that is so prominent and so important, that's a very late discovery, kind of like the lymphatic system, or some of these things, like even like the gut microbiome wasn't talked about 20 plus years ago.
Well, you should know that the endocannabinoid system and the gut microbiome are intricately linked as well. And the gut microbiome seems to feed the endocannabinoid system, which has a feedback into the microbiome. So absolutely, this is another discovery. Fascia, I know that this is a big thing, and podiatry in general, right? Because the foot is this crazy organ, but just in general, understanding what's in between all of these organ systems, right? We're made up of not just organ. There's like this space in us that we used to think was nothing, and now it's something. The same thing in fat cells. Is that on this? No, fat cells aren't on here. Oh my, there's so many cannabinoid receptors in fat cells, and activating the endocannabinoid system can alter brown and white fat activation and accumulation. There's so much information, but it's really hard to say like to connect A and B, because this is a ubiquitous system in every organ system and in every animal, and each molecule that we give someone is going to act on the whole body. When you take THC, you get the whole effect, right?
Right.
But the endocannabinoid system is not really doing that. It's producing the molecules it needs in the brain. It's producing the liver molecules it needs in the liver. It's not sending them everywhere per se.
Right. Right.
And that's the big difference. That's why when you ingest THC, I don't know if you ever have, but certainly I've been in this situation, you get a variety of side effects, again, like pretty consistently. Dry eyes, dry mouth, red eyes, tachycardia, hungry, sleepy eventually. Like it's
Right.
These are normal effects. And if you look at this chart of what the ECS regulates, it makes total sense that activating that system sort of nonchalantly or indiscriminately in all the systems leads to this variety of effects.
Well, this is the system that is activated by exercise, is it not?
Yeah, so there's a bunch. It's definitely activated by exercise, but there's actually the fun data that came out. I'm going to say 4 to 6 years ago, which had to do with the runner's high. You remember what
Right.
causes the runner's high historically? What we always said?
Well, it was enkephalins, endorphins, right?
Yeah, endorphins. Yeah,
Yeah.
enkephalins is a type of endorphin. And endorphin, a fun fact, you probably know this, but I'm sure there's some listeners who don't. That means endogenous morphine system.
Right.
Your endorphins come from the term morphine, because it turns out there's another plant out there, the opium poppy flower, that makes molecules inside of it that activate a system inside of us that we can leverage for therapeutic benefit. This
Right.
isn't that much different. The difference is the endorphin system is not as ubiquitous.
Right.
Is not shared by every vertebrate and not as extensive as this system. But the endorphins is what was formerly ascribed to the runner's high. And it's true that we see a release of endorphins during the runner's high.
Right.
And the runner's high is this phenomenon where distance runners get a tingling in their body, a sense of euphoria, a pulse of energy. They just love it. It's the reason why they're running, oftentimes. Not everyone gets this, by the way, something like 40% of people. But they did an experiment where they found people that experienced the runner's high, and they asked them to experience the runner's high. And then they set them up to experience the runner's high again. But this time they were taking an opioid blocker. So I think it was not naloxone, naltrexone, exactly.
Right.
Not naloxone, naltrexone, which is it's limited. It doesn't act quite the same in the body, but it still blocks the opioid receptors. And despite taking the opioid blocking agent, they still experienced a runner's high. And so this suggests that it is not the endogenous opioids that are fueling this, but instead the endogenous cannabinoids. They've also looked at some cannabinoid levels and seen changes, and there's some other evidence to suggest this is the case. And it's likely that the endogenous cannabinoid system is responsible for mediating the release of the endogenous the endorphins that are part of this response. So it's probably a connected feedback pathway.
Very interesting.
I think it's so cool. Yeah. And this is, again, that's like the last 5 years. This is not something, if you would have learned about the runner's high 10 years ago, endogenous opioids, right? Or endorphins. So really cool. So do you have a favorite strain or a favorite type of smell of cannabis, Stephen, by chance?
I don't. I mean, but tell me about it.
Well, I'm a sucker for something called asamine. Something, if you bring me a variety of cannabis that smells like clementines, like the little oranges, oh my goodness, it just warms my heart. And for some reason, I can't even explain it, it has a more consistently positive effect. Maybe it's my bias because maybe I like that smell. Maybe it's because that molecule that tends to be in those varieties has a specific pharmacological effect. We don't know. But we do know that people consistently have preferences, both in their cannabis and in their food and their essential oils and their smells. So in cannabis and in all plants, the plants produce smelly molecules, aromatics known as terpenoids. Terpenes is the sort of colloquial name. Now, these terpenes are found in all plants. If you look at pinene right here, the brown one here, it's found in conifers, right? Pine trees, that makes sense, but also can be found in sage and parsley and dill. If you look at beta caryophyllene here in the pink, It tends to taste or smell spicy, has all sorts of pharmacological effects, and it's found in cloves and rosemary and black pepper. We could keep going around the wheel here, but these are the 8 most common terpenes, essential oils found in cannabis. And they all have potential therapeutic effects, all have a potential effect on the person's experience, combined with the cannabinoids to equate to something that's frequently called the entourage effect.
Yeah.
And so there's controversy around whether this is real and what it all means. But these are the smelly molecules that are responsible for the majority, not all, the majority of the smells found in cannabis. What else do I want to tell you here? Beta caryophyllene, this pink one. This is the most abundant terpene found in cannabis. It's also the heaviest, so it lingers around the longest. So it kind of smells like what you would think of, that earthy, weedy smell that would come with old cannabis. There's myrcene, which is thought to smell more herbally. Limonene, which has a citrus smell. Linalool is associated with lavender. That's the primary component of lavender essential oil. So cannabis makes these same smelly molecules, and why it has so many different flavor profiles. I think that's really intriguing. We're going to get to the pharmacology of these molecules as well in a second. But I mean, kind of going back to an appeal to nature, right? I don't think the science is settled on essential oils, but I'll be damned if there isn't some decent studies saying that they seem to do something. And it's a long-standing ancient practice that I'm not ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater just because we don't think that smells have a therapeutic effect.
Right.
So I can't explain it, but so many people really ascribe to some of these categories. Oh, I only like cannabis that's high in myrcene, and if I have a cannabis that's high in linalool, I get anxious. But this is only modern data, right? We didn't have this information 10 years ago about what was in the cannabis that people were smoking, so we don't have very many answers yet.
And just for my understanding, the terpenes are in plants primarily for protection, right? From insects or
I mean, if you look at all of these, they almost all are antibacterial or anti-inflammatory or antifungal or anti-larval or antibiotic or the plant produces these as defense and communication molecules. Plants talk to each other. There's a scientific study that looked at plant terpenes. They found that part of the grass smell or let me take that part back. They found that when you injure one plant, that it will release terpenes to let the nearby plants know that the offender is nearby, and other nearby plants will actually alter their terpene production as a defense mechanism. We've seen it in trees, we've seen it in grass, we've seen it in bushes. It's really intriguing stuff.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, life is pretty amazing. And the endocannabinoid system is basically ubiquitous. The cannabis plant seems to have adapted this molecule, again, going back millions of years, long before humans were on the planet. This plant was making molecules, both the terpenes and the cannabinoids, right? So this isn't here for us. This is here to help this plant navigate dynamic life on Earth too, by producing a molecule, you could argue poison, right? That interferes with the regulatory system that's present in all animals. So just not terribly dissimilar than psilocybin in psychedelic mushrooms. The mushroom is not making that because it wanted humans to pick it. It's way older than that. Serotonin is a 2 billion-year-old system. It has something to do with, saving itself.
Right.
So this is cool. And what's really cool about terpenes is they have all these proposed effects, insane amount of proposed in vitro studies. In human studies, way less evidence, okay? Like exorbitantly less. I'm not saying this is the end-all be-all for cannabis. I'm of the mindset that cannabinoids are the primary, most important component. Terpenes come in second. But there is something intriguing that we're learning about the endocannabinoid system, which is that the endocannabinoid system is intertwined with a cellular communication system in our body known as TRPs, or the transient receptor potential ion channels. Now, I don't want to get too into the weeds, and yes, this is a pretty robust slide. Again, I took it from one of my formal talks and kind of threw it in here. This TRP ion channels is a sensory system. It's present heavily in our guts. It's present heavily in our brains and the nerves and all of our organs. They're everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Many of these have been now ascribed to part of the endocannabinoid system, or what's now being dubbed the expanded endocannabinoid system, the endocannabinoidome. Okay, fancy words. Just know the evolution of this master regulatory system we're talking about continues to grow, and we start to unravel more. I want to talk about 3 specific receptors that are known to be part of the endocannabinoid system. They interact with endocannabinoids. One is TRPV1. You kind of mentioned this during our briefer call.
Mm-hmm.
It's the capsaicin receptor. It's the reason chili peppers feel hot, right? Because they're not actually hot. Like if you felt your tongue, even though it's on fire, it is a normal temperature.
Right.
And that's because it's a chemical activating this ion channel that's present heavily in our mucous membranes of our GI tract to help us sense food, like hot chilies, right? And understand their effect on us. What's really interesting is CBD interacts with this receptor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and the endocannabinoids that we were talking about earlier, I didn't talk much about them, but anandamide and 2-AG, the most prominent endocannabinoids, they also interact with this receptor to help give us feedback and reward. So TRPM8, I'm sure you can find it over here. It's in the skin, it's in the GI tract, it's in the lungs. This is the menthol receptor. It's another thermoreceptor that's normally there. It can sense cold, but if it's activated by certain chemicals, it can actually feel cold. And that's the way menthol or mint is actually interacting. So once again, terpenes, menthol found in mint plants, have a action in our body at these receptors that are part of the ECS. One more, mustard. The mustard receptor is called TRPA1, and once again, it's known to interact with certain cannabinoids, although not very much for CBD and THC, but some others. Just really intriguing. So the reason wasabi is hot, the reason menthol is cold, and the reason capsaicin is hot is all connected to this master system we've been talking about, shared by all animals on planet Earth.
Right.
It's pretty nifty.
Now, and you know,
Thanks.
with us and our focus in peripheral neuropathy, we're very aware of these receptors and what some of these things can do. So it's great to see the breakdown that you have here. Let me ask you a question. You say that the CBD.
Let's go to the next slide. Keep going.
Okay. So the CBD is it's an activator of the TRPV1, or
you got it. It's right there. The potent activator of TRPV1. So just like capsaicin is an activator, so is CBD, but it's probably not a full agonist like capsaicin. It's only partially sort of toggling that switch, which is why it doesn't cause the same level of like heat feeling, right?
Right. But
it does. If you put it in your mouth, it will taste and burn. It feels chemically or acidy. It's part of why covering up CBD's taste can be a challenge. Some people report heartburn with it, not dissimilar than capsaicin, right?
Right.
And so it is not uncommon to have a burn or bad taste associated with it. And that's exactly what we're dealing with. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then down here, I kind of mentioned that these are all considered to be ionotropic cannabinoid receptors. So they're ion channels, part of the endocannabinoid system. And CBD interacts with TRPM8. It's interesting, though, because menthol is an activator of TRPM8. And it's known to potentially numb maybe the pain associated with inhaling cigarettes. And CBD does the opposite of menthol there. But again, maybe not as potently. Right? The drugs interacting with the receptor is only part of the story. How they toggle the switch, that is that receptor, is the second part of that story.
Okay.
And it gets complicated pretty quick. Let's see what else we were going to talk about today. Oh, that's the end of my slides. What else do we want to talk about? We want to talk about drug delivery, I think.
Before we continue with this great discussion, I just want to take a quick break to acknowledge this week's sponsor.
Introducing Troche, a line of professional products with patented and proprietary delivery systems that revolutionize phytocannabinoid administration. Troche products are scientifically engineered to provide fast-acting, long-lasting, reliable delivery of phytocannabinoids to support your health goals.
I started using this endocannabinoid support system several months ago, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to optimize their own endocannabinoid system.
Troche. Science, wellness, relief.
Yeah, so let's talk briefly about, the different delivery mechanisms.
Yeah, I'd love that. I think it's an important topic.
Right. So it's like, well, when we had a practice in Arizona, we spent some time in the medical marijuana space, and we would make recommendations to the patients. We saw dramatic things. We were able to reduce people's opiate consumption, if not completely, by 90% many times. So we were very, it was very powerful to see the effects. But we never recommended anybody to smoke anything because we didn't want anything in their lungs necessarily. And a lot of the patients really were of an older demographic. And so, to make a recommendation like, hey, we want you to try some marijuana, it's like, oh, I don't want to smoke that stuff, because they've had all of the decades of propaganda and all of this. So, but when we were able to say, well, no, we would like you to have maybe just a sublingual or maybe an edible, that seemed to be, the patients generally seemed more receptive to that mode of delivery. So let's talk about, obviously smoking it gives you the quickest effect because you don't have any first pass effect with the liver. And it gets, it's pretty quick. But let's hear you kind of lay it out, because I think there's an important understanding here for people.
Yeah, I have a pretty picture. I just switched to another presentation, right? The benefits of being a professor here. So I have a nice picture that's going to talk about the topics that we want to cover. Once again, jumping back to my screen. And this is just a couple examples of drug delivery, right? So when we're delivering cannabis medicine, these are the 4 basic routes that are available to us. So we've got topicals, right? Everyone kind of knows what that is. It's your lotions, your creams, your salves, etc. Now, I want to point out, though, frequently when people say topicals, they think about patches, right? And patches are technically not a topical, are not necessarily a topical product. It depends on whether it's formulated to pass through the skin or whether it's formulated to only act locally where you've applied the patch. There's also enteral routes of administration. So when we're taking things by mouth through the GI tract, you can take edibles. So that's your gummies, your brownies, etc. You've got infused oils, so sometimes called tinctures, right? And then there are other examples of taking things sublingually through that GI tract as well. So you can take that oil, infused oil, under the tongue. You might put a tablet or a troche and put that underneath your lip or underneath your tongue and leave it sit there for a while.
Right.
There's suppositories, both rectal and vaginally. Some controversy over whether they work. And then you've got the traditional, right? What everyone's sort of more familiar with, which is your smoking, vaping, or your dabbing, actually, which is a subtype of, it's somewhere between smoking and vaporization. So jumping ahead to the next slide are some of the challenges associated with each one of those dosage forms. And let's go over one at a time. What do you think the biggest challenge with inhalation is down here, Stephen?
Oh,
you've got some hints here, but what do you? I mean, just what do you think? Like, what could be a natural problem?
You got pulmonary disturbances.
Okay, yeah. So he's got bad lungs, that maybe they can't inhale very well. Maybe they're not able to do the process. I would say the biggest challenge here, it tends to be just how big of a puff was that? Right? This isn't a metered dose inhaler, which is an MDI and albuterol, which delivers 90 micrograms of the active ingredient every time. This is, how long did I hold the button down? How long did I inhale for? How long did I hold my breath for? What product was in that? What terpenes were in that product? So there's a lot of variability just in the drug delivery itself, which is pretty wild. Now, what about smoking? Well, smoking, doesn't have quite as many factors. But what do you think is happening when you smoke something?
I don't know. Tell me.
You destroy it, right?
Yeah.
When you vape, you're vaping somewhere around 400 degrees Fahrenheit. When you smoke, you're somewhere around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit at the hottest point of the ember. So there is degradation of the drug, transformation, and potentially damage. You're producing harmful things. When you smoke, just like when you smoke cigarettes, you're producing tiny little things called polyaromatic hydrocarbons. In other words, junk, right? Stuff that's not good for you in the process of burning material. And that's absolutely a factor. When someone smokes a joint, they light it up. It's estimated they will only get 10 to 20% of any of the drug, the cannabinoids and the terpenes in that joint into their body.
Okay.
50% of all of it is just lost whilst the joint smokes over to the side and the person is breathing in between.
Gotcha.
So it's not a very efficient drug delivery method, and there's a lot of variability. How long did you hold it over here before you took your next puff? And once again, you know, was it windy out? Was your product dry? All these factors can make it a really variable experience. The flip side of that is it's also highly titratable. If after 15 minutes you haven't gotten the effect you want, you can go smoke again because it's already equilibrated in the body, which is not the case when we take it orally, jumping up to enteral. Okay. When we take cannabis orally, it can take up to 2 hours. Sorry, it can take about 2 hours to fully kick in, up to 4 hours to fully kick in.
Right.
So, what do you think the most common reason we see elderly adults in the hospital for cannabis?
I guess they eat too much because they didn't get their effect quickly enough.
Yeah, they tried another one. You know, it didn't work fast enough, so I took another one, and then all of a sudden, I'm deer in headlights. It's way too much. It's really common.
It reminds me of that scene in The Wolf of Wall Street where they were doing the Quaaludes, and they were real old, and it's like, nah, these are dead, you know, and they kept taking them, and the guy finally gets home, and he's like,
he crashed the car.
The car's totally trashed, and he didn't even know he trashed it. But that's
something to that effect. Yes. Yeah. And so the problem is that there's a high variability with oral ingestion of cannabinoids. It is not consistent how much gets absorbed into our bodies. It's dictated by what we ate that day, what we ate alongside of the cannabinoids. And it's very variable. It's estimated between 4 and 20% of the drug that we take orally will get absorbed.
Wow.
And that's so threefold variability, 4 to 20.
And so if their GI pH is messed up, it could be totally different. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one example. You know, we don't fully understand the interaction, but the microbiome could be playing a part. You know, if somebody has, you know, I don't like the term very much, but a leaky gut, right, or has GI disturbances, those could matter. Everyone's different too. My liver functions different than your liver. It's just a fact, right? I treated mine worse in college. I can basically guarantee it. But everybody's functions a little bit differently. And because of that, it's hard to predict how one edible will affect someone. So 10 milligrams for you is very different than 10 milligrams for me.
Right.
Topical administration. This can be really helpful for people who are averse to cannabis, but it's not really well absorbed. So like if you need a systemic effect and you're dealing with something, say like nausea or chronic pain, right? That's probably not localized, but rather systemic. It's not really the best option. Limited data, like no one studied this. There's not a lot of money in it. But there is some evidence that, it could work. And there is definitely evidence that, you know, there's this interaction in the skin with, in cellular studies and interacting with TRP channels and potentially affecting hair growth and wound healing. Lots of things, but very little by way of clinical, like human data.
Right.
And then topical is limited by local effects, right? We kind of mentioned that. Again, topical is not necessarily patch, which is sort of not mentioned in ours. And then suppository, the biggest limitation currently out there is no one's studied it. They're trying. Some brands have recently come out with some vaginal suppositories for menstrual cramps, and they're doing some research. It was just published this week, I think, actually. So exciting times, but no one has really mastered that market yet. So every route of administration comes with its own set of challenges. None are perfect, and we need to find out what's going on with our patient to best adapt drug delivery to their needs. What do I got here? This is just my pharmacokinetics talk. So here's an example of a patch. And now that I have everyone here, you can see topical only goes into the first layer of the skin, but a patch, technically a transdermal patch, would get the drug all the way into the systemic circulation.
And you did not mention any sublingual or oral in administration in that, like troche or anything like that.
Well, to some effect, I think I did, but not entirely. So you're right. I didn't do sublingual. And again, this is probably a reflection of kind of where the market has gone versus where like the science has been in pharmacy for a while. So I also have a little bit of background in compounding pharmacy. I'm very familiar with troches as a dosage form. In fact, it's very common for hormones to be packaged into troches for women who are taking oral hormone replacement for their menopause or sexual health and things of that nature. That's kind of like the world that you live in, I think, right?
Well,
not personally, but I mean, I think our listeners,
yeah. So, but what I was wondering is, how does the bioavailability of like a troche, I understand, because it's more of a sustained effect versus a sublingual. You put drops under your tongue, you might not be able to hold it that much. Maybe you're salivating more than you would, one day. Like you talk about, well, is it a big puff or a little puff? So how's that playing out type of thing. So what's your thought processes on that? And can you maybe get more of a universal basically
consistency, I think is what you're
consistency.
looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So I guess I was getting there. So to jump back in where I was, so in pharmacy, this is a well-established thing, especially when we're delivering fat-soluble drugs that we want to get into the body. Like,
I lost you.
dosing is definitely a factor. The industry has gotten away and ahead of itself in what it's advertising, saying that sublingual, which means under the tongue, with these infused oils or tinctures is better. In fact, my company, the Canigma, which you've seen scattered around throughout today, we even have a graphic, which was developed slightly before I became the chief science there, that says sublingual oils start to work within 15 to 30 minutes, as opposed to oral edibles take 30 minutes to 2 hours. So we even in our own published efforts, however, the data is very mixed on this, and it's arguable. Can you keep this sublingual oil under your tongue long enough? Is it soluble enough to cross through that barrier? Is it formulated appropriately if it's just some cannabinoids dissolved in oil? And most evidence says no, it's not doing very much at all. And sublingual administration has marginal effects when we're doing it through these infused oils. No one has really studied it effectively in the troche space from a pharmacokinetic perspective, which is like drug levels.
Right.
I'm not sure if troche has done any work in that, but we do have a lot of evidence on the compounding pharmacy side to say when dealing with substances like this is an optimized dosage form. And when you think about a troche as compared to that liquid, the troche's going into the mouth and sitting there for up to 30 or 40 minutes until it fully dissolves, which is expanding exposure time of that mucous membrane to the drug, which is inherently, when you're talking about drug delivery, one of the most critical things. Right. So I have basically no doubt that a troche versus a sublingual oil would have a more favorable pharmacokinetic profile, which would be then a faster absorption and potentially longer duration, although not necessarily, because if you're swallowing it, it's going to go through first pass before it gets into the body. But with that in mind, something like if we could get more absorption from the cavity, and again, I think we need studies to confirm this, but hypothetically, it makes total sense. The more absorption we get from the oral cavity, the faster it comes on, and the more consistent the drug will be. Because the more that's absorbed without having to first go through the liver, first pass, the more likely we are to have a benefit. I think that's all I want on this slide, so I'm going to back out of there.
All right, Codi, that is so fantastic. I mean, almost anybody could just spend, listening to this podcast and have, I think, one of the best grasps of the whole physiology. I think the way you laid it out was phenomenally good. And I'm very appreciative of you taking the time to get on the show with us today. I am going to have to get you back on and talk about some of the psychedelics, because I've had a couple of shows now where we've talked a little bit about psilocybin and, some of those types of things. And I think you're the person that could really explain it from a pharmacological standpoint. I know a lot of the docs that hang around with me, you mentioned organic chemistry or anything like that, they go into some type of a reaction, but you actually made it fun and very understandable. And I want to thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I like to think that's my skill set, and I do appreciate it. I think it could be really fun to just do an overview. What are the differences? What are these substances? Where do they come from? What is their historical use? Okay, we could educate and have a little fun in the process.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah, and take care, everyone. I do appreciate the time.
And I will put in the show notes how they can get a hold of you if they want to send you an email or anything like that. So again, but let's talk soon.
Appreciate you, Stephen. Be well.
Thank you.
I'm constantly exploring new avenues to enhance well-being and address any health concerns. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to an exciting supplement called Stem Regen, which I take daily and genuinely believe could revolutionize your health journey as well. Stem Regen stands out as a game changer in the realm of wellness. Crafted from 5 potent plant extracts, it boasts a remarkable ability to stimulate the release of your body's own stem cells from your red bone marrow. Why is this significant? Well, stem cells are the superheroes of our body's natural repair system. They possess the extraordinary capacity to morph into various cell types, aiding in tissue regeneration and repair. As we age, the quantity of circulating stem cells in our system reduces significantly, impairing our body's ability to heal and rejuvenate itself effectively. Stem Regen steps in to counter this decline by kickstarting the release of stem cells into circulation, thereby bolstering your body's innate repair mechanisms. Once unleashed into your bloodstream, these mobilized stem cells actively seek out areas of damage or injury, initiating the healing process. By incorporating Stem Regen into your daily routine, you're essentially empowering your body to tap into its own regenerative prowess more efficiently. I firmly believe that Stem Regen could be a valuable addition to your wellness regimen, especially if you're seeking to fortify overall health and vitality, accelerate tissue repair, or expedite recovery from injury or illness. This first of its kind stem cell mobilizer is changing the game in regenerative medicine. Don't wait to unleash your body's innate healing capabilities. Visit stemregen.co/Dr. Stephen, that's with a PH, and use the code SBPOD to get a 15% discount off your first order of Stem Regen. I hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If you think you might have tickled just a few neurons inside that cerebral cortex, please spread the word to your friends and colleagues and tell them that they need to get spelunking. Also, if you can take a minute to leave a review on your podcast provider of choice, and especially Apple Podcasts, that would greatly help the show and be so appreciated, provided it's positive. And if not, then just keep your pie hole shut and stay down in that cave. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find us a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.